Every single day, there is a voice talking inside your head. It tells you what you can do, what you can't do, what you deserve, and what you should fear. Most people think they control that voice, but the truth is that voice often controls them. And here's the uncomfortable reality: the quality of your life will never rise above the quality of your thoughts. If you don't learn to control your mind will quietly decide your future for you. Most people believe their thoughts simply happen to them, as if the mind is some uncontrollable force that randomly produces ideas, fears, and doubts. But thoughts are not accidents, they are responses. They are shaped by the meanings you've accepted over time. Every time you hesitate, every time you doubt yourself, every time you feel fear before even trying, there is a deeper reason behind it. That reason is not the situation in front of you. It is the belief sitting quietly underneath your thinking. If you want to control your mind, the first step is not to silence it, but to understand it. Control begins the moment you start asking why. When a negative thought appears, most people either fight it or surrender to it. Both reactions give the thought power. But when you pause and ask, why do I think this way? You shift from being a victim of your mind to becoming a leader of it. That question creates distance. It turns emotion into information. Suddenly, the thought is no longer a command. It is a clue pointing to a belief you may have never consciously chosen, yet one that has been guiding your decisions for years. These beliefs are often formed early, reinforced by experiences, opinions of others, and repeated failures or successes. A single comment can turn into a lifelong narrative. A setback can quietly teach your mind that trying again is dangerous. Over time, these meanings become automatic. You stop questioning them, and they begin to feel like facts, but they are not facts. They are interpretations, and interpretations can be changed once they are seen clearly. When you understand the why behind a thought, you gain leverage. You realize that your fear is not about the present moment, but about an old story your mind is still telling. You realize that your self-doubt is not proof of inability, but evidence of conditioning. This awareness is powerful because you cannot control something you do not understand. But once you understand it, you are no longer controlled by it. This process also brings responsibility. When you stop blaming circumstances and start examining beliefs, you take ownership of your inner world. And ownership is freedom. It allows you to replace unconscious thinking with intentional meaning. Instead of asking, why does this always happen to me? You begin asking, what meaning am I giving this situation? That shift alone changes how your mind responds over time. As you repeatedly question the origin of your thoughts, your mind learns a new pattern. It stops reacting automatically and starts seeking clarity. You no longer accept every thought as truth. You evaluate it, you lead it, and that is where real control begins, not by forcing positive thinking, but by understanding the meaning behind every thought you allow to shape your life. Most people live their entire lives believing that their thoughts define who they are. If a thought says, I'm not good enough, they accept it as a statement of identity. If a thought says, I will fail, they treat it as a prediction of the future. But this is where control is lost. The moment you confuse your thoughts with your identity, you surrender leadership of your life to whatever passes through your mind. Learning to control your mind begins with a simple but powerful realization. You are the one who experiences thoughts, not the one who is created by them. Your mind is designed to produce thoughts constantly. That is its function, just like the heart pumps blood. But just because the heart pumps faster does not mean something is wrong. It simply means it is responding to conditions. In the same way, your mind responds to stress, fear, memories, and habits by producing thoughts. These thoughts are reactions, not truths. When you understand this, you stop taking every thought personally. You stop assuming that every mental message deserves belief or action. This distinction creates space. When a negative thought appears, instead of saying, this is who I am, you begin to say, this is something my mind is doing. That small shift changes your relationship with your inner world. You move from being inside the thought to observing it. And observation brings choice. You cannot choose what thoughts appear, but you can always choose how you respond to them. When you treat the mind as a tool, you stop expecting it to always be positive or supportive. A tool's job is to process information and protect you, often by imagining risks. That is why the mind naturally leans toward fear and caution. It is not trying to sabotage you, it is trying to keep you safe based on past experiences. But safety and growth are not the same thing. If you let the mind run without direction, it will prioritize comfort over progress every time. Seeing the mind as a tool also means learning how to use it intentionally. A tool is most effective when guided by a clear hand. When you set goals, create routines, and define standards, your mind begins to align with those directions. Instead of asking, how do I feel today? You start asking, what is required of me today? This trains the mind to support action instead of resisting it. Over time, this shift reduces internal conflict. You stop fighting your thoughts and start leading them. Fear may still show up, but it no longer decides your behavior. Doubt may still appear, but it no longer defines your worth. The mind becomes a resource instead of a ruler, and when your mind works for you rather than against you, clarity replaces chaos and control becomes a natural state rather than a constant struggle. Most people believe focus is something you either have or you don't, as if concentration were a rare talent reserved for a few disciplined individuals. In reality, focus is not a gift. It is a decision repeated over time. Your mind is constantly pulled in multiple directions, not because it is weak, but because it responds to whatever you allow to capture your attention. The truth is simple and uncomfortable. Your mind reflects your priorities, not your potential. Where your attention goes, your mental energy follows. Every distraction you tolerate trains your mind to fragment. Notifications, comparisons, endless information, and unfinished thoughts compete for space in your head. Over time, this creates a mental environment where clarity becomes difficult and presence feels impossible. The mind adapts to chaos if chaos is what it is fed daily. But the same mind can adapt to clarity when focus becomes intentional. Control begins when you accept that focus is a choice you make again and again, especially when it feels uncomfortable. When you choose what deserves your attention, you shape the quality of your thinking. A mind constantly focused on fear will search for threats even when none exist. A mind focused on progress will look for solutions instead of excuses. This is not about ignoring reality. It is about deciding which part of reality you allow to dominate your inner world. Focus is less about concentration and more about commitment. Commitment to what matters most, even when distractions feel more rewarding in the moment. The challenge is that distraction often feels easier than focus. Focus demands presence, effort, and responsibility. Distraction offers relief without growth. When you avoid focus, you're often avoiding the discomfort of progress. But when you train yourself to stay with one task, one idea, or one goal, you build mental endurance. This endurance becomes confidence. You begin to trust your ability to stay engaged. Even when the mind wants to escape, your environment plays a critical role in this process. The mind follows what it sees, hears, and repeatedly encounters. If your surroundings are filled with noise, your thoughts will mirror that noise. But when you design your environment to support focus by reducing unnecessary input, creating structure, and setting boundaries, your mind learns a new pattern. Focus stops feeling forced and starts feeling natural. Over time, deliberate focus reshapes your identity. You stop seeing yourself as scattered or overwhelmed and start seeing yourself as someone who directs attention with purpose. This shift does not happen overnight, but it compounds. Each moment of chosen focus strengthens the next one. Eventually, clarity replaces confusion, and your mind becomes a place of intention rather than impulse. Control, then, is no longer about trying harder. It is about choosing wisely where your attention belongs. Most people wait for the perfect mental state before they begin. They wait to feel focused, clear, or inspired, believing that once the mind cooperates, action will follow. But the mind does not work that way. Focus does not arrive first. It is created through decision and direction. The mind takes cues from what you repeatedly choose to give your attention to. If you allow your attention to be pulled by everything, your mind learns to stay scattered. If you train it to stay with one thing long enough, it learns depth, clarity, and strength. The mind is naturally reactive. It responds instantly to movement, noise, novelty, and emotion. That is why distractions feel so powerful. They hijack attention without effort. Focus, on the other hand, requires intention. It asks you to decide again and again that this moment, this task, or this goal matters more than the alternatives. This decision may feel small, but over time it becomes a defining habit. What you consistently focus on becomes what your mind believes is important. When attention is unmanaged, the mind jumps ahead to worries, regrets, and imagined outcomes. It lives everywhere except the present moment. This creates mental fatigue without real progress, but when you consciously pull your attention back to what you can do now, the mind settles, not because the problems disappear, but because clarity replaces overwhelm. Focus simplifies complexity. It narrows the field so your energy is no longer wasted. Choosing focus also means accepting discomfort. Focus exposes you to effort, uncertainty, and responsibility. Distraction numbs those feelings temporarily, which is why it is so tempting. But every time you choose distraction, You reinforce the belief that discomfort should be avoided. Over time, this weakens your ability to stay present when things get challenging. When you choose focus instead, you send your mind a different message. Discomfort is not a threat, it is part of growth. The mind learns through repetition. Each time you redirect your attention, you strengthen the mental muscle responsible for control. At first, the mind will resist. It will look for easier stimulation, familiar patterns, and quick escapes. This resistance is not failure, it is training. Staying with your focus despite that resistance teaches the mind discipline. And disciplined attention creates confidence because you begin to trust yourself to stay engaged even when it would be easier to quit. Over time, focused attention changes how you see yourself. You stop identifying as someone who is easily distracted or overwhelmed. You begin to see yourself as someone who chooses deliberately. This shift affects every area of life because focus is not limited to tasks. It applies to thoughts, emotions, and goals. When you decide where your attention goes, your mind stops drifting and starts following direction. And with that direction comes clarity, momentum, and a quiet sense of control that no distraction can provide. Most people depend on motivation to move forward. They wait to feel excited, inspired, or emotionally ready before they take action. But motivation is unstable by nature. It rises when things feel easy and disappears when things become uncomfortable. If your mind is trained to rely on motivation, it will always look for reasons to stop when effort is required. This is where control is lost. True control is built through discipline, because discipline does not ask how you feel, it asks what must be done. Discipline gives the mind structure. Without structure, the mind drifts, negotiates, and hesitates. With structure, the mind follows direction. When you decide in advance what you will do regardless of mood, you remove internal debate. That debate is often more exhausting than the task itself. Discipline simplifies decision-making by turning choices into commitments. Instead of asking, "Should I do this today?" the question becomes, "When will I do it?" That shift saves mental energy and creates consistency. The mind resists discipline at first because discipline limits freedom in the short term. It removes the option to escape discomfort, but what feels like restriction initially becomes freedom over time. When your actions are disciplined, your mind becomes calmer. It no longer has to constantly decide, justify, or procrastinate. It learns to trust the system you have created. This trust reduces anxiety and increases confidence. Because progress becomes predictable, discipline also rewires how the mind interprets effort. Without discipline, effort feels like punishment. With discipline, effort becomes normal. The mind adapts to whatever standard you repeatedly enforce. If the standard is inconsistency, the mind becomes chaotic. If the standard is follow-through, the mind becomes reliable. Over time, disciplined actions create evidence that you can rely on yourself, and nothing strengthens mental control more than self-trust. When you act with discipline, motivation often follows, not the other way around. Action creates momentum, and momentum creates motivation. The mind responds to progress. Even small wins reinforce the belief that effort leads somewhere meaningful. This belief is powerful because it replaces resistance with willingness. The mind stops asking for emotional permission and starts aligning with direction. Discipline also protects you from emotional extremes. When emotions are high, discipline keeps you grounded. When emotions are low, discipline keeps you moving. It becomes the steady force that guides behavior regardless of internal weather. Over time, the mind learns that it does not need to be convinced every day. It learns to follow commitment rather than comfort. And in that process, control becomes effortless. Not because the mind is always cooperative, but because you no longer depend on it to be. The mind learns through repetition far more than it learns through logic. You can understand something intellectually and still fail to live it daily because understanding alone does not create change. What shapes your mind is not what you know, but what you repeatedly tell yourself and repeatedly do. Every thought you return to, every phrase you silently repeat, and every pattern you reinforce sends a signal to your mind about what should be believed. Over time, the mind stops questioning repetition and starts accepting it as truth. This is why negative self-talk is so powerful. A single doubtful thought may not have much impact, but when it is repeated day after day, the mind begins to treat it as an identity. It no longer feels like a thought, it feels like reality. The same mechanism works in the opposite direction. When you intentionally repeat empowering messages, focused actions, and disciplined behaviors, the mind begins to align with them. Repetition does not just influence belief, it builds it. The mind is constantly looking for familiarity. Familiar thoughts feel safe, even when they are limiting. When you introduce new ways of thinking, the mind may resist at first, because unfamiliar patterns feel uncertain. This resistance is often mistaken for failure, but it is actually part of the rewiring process. Each time you repeat a new thought or behavior despite resistance, you weaken the old pattern and strengthen the new one. Control is not built in moments of inspiration. It is built in moments of consistency. Repetition also shapes emotion. Al responses. The first time you face discomfort with a calm mindset, it feels forced. The second time, it feels slightly easier. Over time, your emotional reaction changes automatically. The mind adapts to whatever you expose it to regularly. If you repeatedly choose courage over avoidance, the mind begins to associate challenge with capability rather than fear. This is how confidence is built, not through affirmations alone, but through repeated alignment between thought and action. What you feed your mind daily matters more than occasional breakthroughs. Sporadic effort creates temporary change, but repeated effort creates identity. The mind does not remember isolated moments, it remembers patterns. When positive habits, intentional language, and disciplined focus are repeated, the mind reorganizes itself around those patterns. What once required effort becomes natural. Eventually, repetition removes the need for constant willpower. The mind begins to operate in alignment with your chosen direction automatically. This is the true power of rewiring. You are no longer forcing control, you are living it. Thoughts, emotions, and actions start working together instead of against each other. And when repetition becomes deliberate, control is no longer something you chase. It becomes who you are. Most people are uncomfortable with silence. The moment things become quiet, the mind rushes to fill the space with noise. Thoughts, worries, memories, plans, and imagined problems. This constant mental chatter feels normal, but it slowly weakens control. A noisy mind reacts faster than it thinks. It jumps to conclusions, magnifies fear, and creates urgency where none exists. Silence, on the other hand, interrupts this pattern. It creates space between stimulus and response, and in that space, control is strengthened. Silence is not the absence of thought, it is the absence of unnecessary reaction. When you intentionally slow down and allow moments of stillness, you begin to observe your thoughts instead of being pulled by them. This observation changes everything. Thoughts lose their emotional grip when they are seen clearly. What once felt overwhelming becomes manageable simply because you are no longer entangled in it. Silence turns the mind from a battlefield into a place of awareness. In quiet moments, the mind reveals its habits. You start noticing how often it rushes ahead to future worries or drags you back into past regrets. You see patterns you were previously too distracted to recognize. This awareness is essential for control because you cannot lead what you cannot see. Silence acts like a mirror, showing you how your mind actually operates rather than how you assume it does. Modern life trains the mind to fear silence. Constant input feels productive, but it often leads to mental exhaustion. When the mind is always stimulated, it never fully processes experiences. This buildup creates restlessness and emotional overload. Silence gives the mind room to organize, release tension, and reset. It allows clarity to emerge naturally instead of being forced through effort. Practicing silence also strengthens emotional regulation. When something triggers anger, fear, or anxiety, a silent pause prevents immediate reaction. That pause breaks the automatic cycle of impulse and regret. The mind learns that it does not need to respond instantly to every thought and feels. Over time, this reduces reactivity and increases self-control. Calm becomes a trained response, not a temporary mood. Silence also reconnects you with intention. In quiet moments, distractions fade and priorities become clearer. You begin to hear what actually matters instead of what is loudest. This clarity guides better decisions because they are no longer driven by urgency or pressure. The mind becomes steady, not because problems disappear, but because you are no longer overwhelmed by noise. As silence becomes a regular practice, the mind adapts. It stops craving constant stimulation and starts valuing depth. Thoughts slow down, focus sharpens, and emotional balance improves. Control grows quietly without force or struggle. In silence, the mind learns to listen, and when the mind listens, it finally becomes something you can lead instead of something that leads you. A mind without purpose is easily controlled by fear, comfort, and circumstance. When there is no clear direction, the mind looks for the fastest way to feel safe, not the most meaningful way to grow. This is why uncertainty feels so heavy for many people. It is not the difficulty of the situation that overwhelms them, but the absence of a guiding reason. Purpose gives the mind a destination. And with a destination, confusion begins to fade. When purpose is unclear, the mind becomes reactive. It responds emotionally to obstacles, criticism, and setbacks because it has no larger context to place them in. Every challenge feels personal, every delay feels like failure, and every discomfort feels unnecessary. But when purpose is defined, the same challenges take on a different meaning. They become part of the journey rather than signs to stop. The mind no longer asks, "Why is this happening to me?" It begins to ask, "What is this preparing me for?" Leading the mind with purpose requires clarity about what truly matters. Purpose is not about vague motivation or temporary excitement. It is about deeply held values and long-term intent. When these are clear, the mind organizes itself around them. Thoughts align. Decisions become simpler. You spend less time negotiating with yourself because your actions are guided by something larger than momentary feelings. Purpose also gives the mind endurance. Without it, the mind seeks escape when pressure increases. With it, the mind develops resilience. It learns to tolerate discomfort because it understands the reason behind it. This understanding transforms struggle into effort and effort into progress. The mind stops resisting challenges and starts using them as proof of commitment. Fear loses much of its power in the presence of purpose. Fear thrives in uncertainty and indecision. Purpose replaces both with direction. Even when outcomes are unclear, the mind remains steady because it knows why it is moving forward. This stability creates confidence, not because success is guaranteed, but because the path is meaningful. When you consistently remind your mind of its purpose, you train it to filter distractions. Not everything deserves your attention. Not every opportunity aligns with your direction. Purpose acts as a lens, helping the mind focus on what supports growth and ignore what does not. This reduces mental clutter and increases clarity. Over time, purpose becomes an internal compass. The mind no longer waits for external validation or perfect conditions. It moves with intention. Thoughts, emotions, and actions begin to work together instead of pulling in different direct ions. Control emerges naturally, not from force, but from alignment. When the mind is led by purpose, it stops wandering and starts following, and in that following, it finds strength, calm, and direction. Learning to control your mind is not about eliminating negative thoughts or achieving constant positivity. It is about leadership. Throughout this journey, one truth becomes clear. The mind responds to direction, not force. When you understand why your thoughts exist, separate your identity from them, choose focus deliberately, build discipline, repeat empowering patterns, embrace silence, and lead with purpose. You stop reacting to life and start shaping it. Control is not a single moment of mastery. It is a daily practice of awareness and intention. When you take responsibility for your inner world, everything changes. Challenges no longer feel like personal attacks, they become information. Fear no longer defines your limits, it signals where growth is possible. Instead of being pulled by emotions, distractions, and habits, you begin to move with clarity. The mind, once chaotic and demanding, becomes cooperative and supportive. This shift does not make life easy, but it makes it meaningful because you're no longer controlled by what happens. You are guided by how you respond. True mental control brings consistency. You stop relying on motivation and start trusting your standards. You stop waiting for the perfect moment and start creating progress in imperfect conditions. Over time, small disciplined choices compound into confidence, focus, and inner stability. The mind learns that you are in charge, and with that trust comes calm. Calm not because there are no problems, but because you know how to face them without losing yourself. In the end, controlling your mind is about becoming the kind of person who leads from within. When your thoughts align with purpose, your actions gain direction, and your life gains depth. This is not about winning against the mind. It is about guiding it. And once you do, you don't just change how you think, you change how you live, how you decide, and how you move forward no matter what stands in your way. Thank you for taking the time to watch and listen. Your presence here means you've chosen growth over comfort and awareness over autopilot. I truly appreciate you for investing these moments in strengthening your mindset and taking a step toward greater self-control and clarity. If this message resonated with you, don't forget to support the channel by liking the video, sharing it with someone who needs it, and subscribing for more powerful content like this. Your support helps this message reach more minds that are ready to grow. Until next time, stay focused, stay disciplined, and keep leading your mind with purpose. Thank you once again, and goodbye.